You ever notice how some people can sit right across from you and say almost nothing, and yet the room feels different? They laugh at your jokes a second longer than everyone else. They remember some tiny detail you mentioned weeks ago. They're present in a way that's quiet but unmistakable. And somehow you leave the interaction thinking, was that just friendliness or something else? Maybe it's happening to you right now. Maybe it's a coworker who suddenly goes still when you enter the room, or a friend who replies to your messages carefully, thoughtfully, but never crosses that obvious line. Or maybe, if we're being honest, it's you, watching someone you like from a safe distance, choosing restraint over risk. Because not all attraction announces itself. Some of it hides, some of it whispers, and some of it stays silent on purpose. Today, we're unpacking the psychology of a girl who is attracted to you but stays quiet. Not the dramatic, obvious signals, not the movie version, but the subtle human patterns that don't always look like attraction until you understand what's happening underneath. And once you do, you start noticing it everywhere. Let's start with the first profile. There's the girl who treats you like a fragile object she doesn't want to drop. Picture this. You're talking in a group. Everyone's joking, interrupting, riffing off each other. She's mostly quiet, but when you speak, she looks directly at you. Not intensely, just fully. Later, she asks a follow-up question about something you said in passing, not in a flirty way, in a "you mattered enough for me to remember" way. Psychologically, this is often about emotional precision. Some people don't flirt by expanding outward. They do it by narrowing their focus. When she's attracted, she becomes careful, controlled, almost restrained. Why? Because attraction, for her, isn't playful chaos. It's a loaded object. It carries consequences. If she reveals too much, she risks rejection, embarrassment, or changing the dynamic. So, instead of acting bold, she acts intentional. She listens harder. She chooses her words more carefully. She keeps her emotional volume low, but her attention high. If you've ever felt like someone was unusually thoughtful towards you, but never overt, that might be this type. And if you are the one doing it, you might recognize the internal logic. If I'm subtle enough, I can stay safe. Then there's another profile, and this one is often misunderstood. This is the girl who gets quieter the more she likes you. At first, she's normal, talkative, casual. Then something shifts. Her replies get shorter. She hesitates before speaking. Sometimes she seems nervous, even awkward, in moments where she used to be relaxed. And from the outside, it can look like disinterest, or boredom, or emotional distance. But internally, the opposite is happening. Attraction can trigger self-monitoring. The moment feelings appear, she starts watching herself, how she sounds, how she looks, what she says. Suddenly, every interaction feels high stakes, and silence becomes a way to avoid making a mistake. This isn't shyness in the simple sense. It's cognitive overload. Her mind is busy running simulations. Was that weird? Should I say more? Did that come off wrong? So she says less. She freezes instead of risking misinterpretation. Ironically, the quieter she becomes, the more intense the attraction often is. Because when there's nothing to lose, people are relaxed. When something matters, they become careful. If someone seems to retreat as emotional closeness increases, it might not be withdrawal, it might be investment. Then there's the girl who hides attraction behind competence. She doesn't flirt, she helps. She remembers deadlines. She offers useful advice. She checks in when something stressful is happening. She shows up when needed, but she never crosses into emotional vulnerability. She never makes it obvious that you're special. This is attraction filtered through control. Psychologically, some people express interest through usefulness rather than expression. It's safer to be valuable than exposed. If she contributes, supports, or stabilizes, she can stay close without revealing desire. Her care is real, but it's packaged as practicality. Often, this pattern comes from environments where emotional expression wasn't rewarded, where being helpful earned connection, but being open didn't. So, attraction becomes something to manage, not reveal. If you notice someone consistently supporting you in quiet, functional ways, but never stepping into emotional territory, that might be her version of closeness. And if you're the one doing this, you might tell yourself you're just being nice, even though you're emotionally invested. Then there's a subtler profile, one that almost never gets talked about. This is the girl who's attracted to you, but respects the existing situation too much to interfere. Maybe you're taken. Maybe she's taken. Maybe you work together. Maybe you're in the same friend group. The attraction exists, but it's fenced in by context. So she chooses silence as an ethical boundary. Psychologically, this kind of restraint often comes from high empathy. She imagines consequences beyond her own feelings. She doesn't want to complicate your life, disrupt relationships, or create tension. So instead of acting on attraction, she contains it. And containment takes effort. She might avoid one-on-one situations, or keep interactions strictly appropriate, or redirect conversations away from emotional intimacy. Not because she doesn't feel it, but because she feels it too clearly. This is one of the hardest forms of attraction to detect, because it looks like distance, but underneath, it's restraint paired with respect. And finally, there's the most paradoxical type. The girl who stays quiet because she assumes you're not interested. Not because of low confidence necessarily, but because she's reading the room through past experiences. She's learned that attraction isn't always reciprocated, that misreading signals can be costly, so she waits. She looks for confirmation before acting, repeated confirmation, and until she sees it, she holds her feelings internally. Psychologically, this is risk-avoidant attraction. Not fearful, just measured. She's waiting for a green light that never quite turns on, so the attraction remains unspoken, not because it's weak, but because it lacks external permission. If you've ever thought, "I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make it weird," you already understand this mindset. Now here's the twist most people miss. Quiet attraction isn't a single behavior, it's a strategy. It's how someone manages desire in a world where expressing it isn't always safe, welcomed, or simple. Silence, in this context, isn't absence, it's regulation. And that's why misinterpretations happen. One person reads silence as disinterest, the other experiences it as intense restraint. Two completely different realities passing each other quietly. So what do you do with this? You start paying attention to patterns instead of signals. Consistency instead of intensity, presence instead of performance. And you ask yourself, not just do they like me, but how does this person handle things that matter to them? Because attraction doesn't always show up as confidence or charm. Sometimes it shows up as care, or distance, or control, or quiet attention that never quite steps forward. And if any of this felt familiar, maybe it's because you've been on one side of this dynamic before, or maybe you're on it right now. So take a moment. Which profile felt uncomfortably accurate? Which one made you think of someone specific? And which one might actually describe you? If you want to explore more of these quiet psychological patterns, the ones that rarely get named, you know where to find us. And if you have a story, an observation, or a perspective, leave it below. Sometimes the quietest things are the most revealing. Let's go a little deeper because there's one more layer most conversations never touch. Quiet attraction doesn't just affect how someone behaves around you, it shapes how they interpret everything you do. A neutral comment becomes loaded. A delayed reply becomes a story that replays in her head longer than she'd like to admit. When attraction is unspoken, the mind fills the silence with meaning. So she watches patterns, not in a dramatic way, more like quiet data collection. Does your tone change with her? Do you ask follow-up questions? Do you remember what she said? Do you seek proximity without realizing it? And here's the subtle part. She often assumes you're more emotionally aware than you are. Because she's been monitoring herself so closely, she assumes you're doing the same, that you'd notice if she crossed a line, that you'd feel it if something shifted. So she stays contained, trusting that if something were mutual, it would somehow reveal itself without her having to risk it. This is why quiet attraction can last a long time, months, sometimes years. Not because nothing is happening, but because both people are waiting for clarity to appear organically. And occasionally, it never does. There's also an internal contradiction she lives with. On one hand, she values emotional maturity. On the other, she's suppressing something emotionally honest. That tension can create distance even when closeness is desired. She might pull back suddenly, not because attraction faded, but because holding it quietly became exhausting.
Emotional restraint takes energy, and when it goes unrecognized, it can start to feel lonely. This is often the moment when people say, "I thought there was something there, but then she became distant." What actually happened is that silence stopped feeling sustainable. And if you're the one experiencing this kind of attraction, you might recognize the private bargaining. "I'll give it a little more time. I'll see if they notice. I'll let it fade." Except it doesn't fade neatly, it just gets quieter. Now, this doesn't mean every quiet person is secretly attracted, and it doesn't mean silence is a sign you should assume interest. Psychology isn't a decoding machine, it's a lens. The real insight here isn't about spotting hidden attraction, it's about understanding how differently people handle emotional risk. Some people externalize, some people internalize. Some move towards clarity, others wait for it. And once you understand that, something shifts. You stop over-interpreting silence as indifference, and you stop assuming expression is the only form of honesty. You begin to notice emotional restraint as a signal in itself. So if you think someone might be quietly attracted to you, the most respectful thing isn't pressure or confrontation, it's clarity, warmth, making space where expression wouldn't feel catastrophic. And if you were the one staying quiet, maybe the question isn't, "What if I'm wrong?" but "What does it cost me to never find out?" Because silence can protect you, but it can also protect you out of connection. So take a moment with that. Which part of this felt familiar in a way you didn't expect? Which behavior suddenly made sense in hindsight? And what might change if quiet attraction didn't have to stay so quiet? If this kind of inner psychology resonates with you, the unspoken, the restrained, the subtle, you might want to stick around. These patterns shape far more of our lives than we admit, and sometimes just naming them is enough to loosen their grip.